Hello everyone, and a very warm welcome to this webinar in the Mammal Society free webinar series. We're really excited today that we're focusing on, I think, one of the most exciting issues in mammal conservation at the moment, which is the reintroduction of wildcats. And we've got Dr Helen Senn here to join us, who'll be giving some insights from the Saving Wildcats project up in the Cairngorms. Before I hand over to Helen, I just wanted to give a little bit of housekeeping and introduce the Mammal Society. So first of all, for those of you who are less familiar with Zoom, this is a Zoom webinar. As soon as I've finished introductions, I'll be opening up the chat. You're really welcome to introduce yourself, introduce your projects, make comments, put discussion points in there. Please use the chat as a forum for open chat. If you have a question for Dr. Helen, however, please could you put that into the Q&A box, and we'll be picking up on questions at the end and covering as many as possible before we run out of time and let everyone get back to their Fridays and their bank holiday weekends. So I'm Matt Larson-Daw. I'm the CEO of the Mammal Society, and we're delighted to be hosting this webinar today. For those of you that are less familiar with the Mammal Society, we are a British Isles-wide conservation organisation focused on achieving this vision, a future in which sustainable mammal populations thrive as part of healthy and diverse ecosystems that benefit people and nature across the British Isles. And if you'd like to know more about our work, please do visit our website, mammal.org.uk. Our mission is threefold. On the one hand, we work to ensure a bright future for mammals in the British Isles by inspiring, informing, supporting and enhancing conservation projects and the policies that protect and restore native mammal populations and their habitats. Secondly, we empower conservationists, students, citizen scientists and nature champions to play a key role in mammal conservation, now and in the future, through providing training, resources and survey activations. And there's loads of ways that you can get involved. If you go to our website, there will be something for everybody for surveys in your local area that are either nationwide or specific to where you live. And finally, we seek to build public awareness of and support for mammal conservation through education, communications and campaigns. So that's all from me. Hopefully you will discover the Q&A box as Dr. Senn goes through her slides, and we will cover as many questions as possible at the end. And I'll come on at the end and just signpost a few more things from the Mammal Society if we've got time. But without further ado, I will pass over to Dr. Senn.
Thanks so much, Matt, and it's really great to be invited to speak to the Mammal Society about this. I'm just sharing my screen. Hopefully this is going to work. Is that all fine? Yeah, great. Okay. Well, yeah, my name's Helen Senn. I'm Head of Conservation and Science at the Zoological Society of Scotland, and I'm the lead for the Saving Wildcats project. And I'm really happy to be updating you all, and thanks for spending your lunch break listening to me. So the Saving Wildcats project is a partnership project. It's led by the Royal Zoological Society of Scotland, and it's got partners in the Cairngorms National Park Authority, Nature Scot, Forestry and Land Scotland, Northern Ark in Sweden, and Junta de Andalucía in Spain. And really what we're trying to solve is the issue of wildcats being on the brink of extinction. So just a little bit of a general overview, and I'll be going into some more of this in a bit more detail. Wildcats are our last remaining felid. And it's really hard to know exactly how many wildcats are left in Britain, but the official estimates sit at around 100 to 300 individuals. But those estimates are really complicated by hybridization because they hybridize with domestic cat. And there's a whole variety of threats, including particularly persecution, that have led to the wildcats becoming extinct. In terms of the captive breeding population of wildcats, which has been viewed as an insurance for the population, there's 150 or so animals in captivity in Britain. And so this forms part of the insurance for the species, and in a sense is a part of the ability for us to conduct this project. And I'm going to be talking in a lot more detail about that in a moment. And my talk's going to focus a bit on really how we've got to where we are today with wildcats and the different conservation efforts that have gone in to trying to preserve this species so far, and how this has led to the first release project for wildcats that's been conducted in Britain. And I think you'll pick up that a key theme of the talk is that it's not really possible for a single person or organisation to recover a species from the brink of extinction once we've got to a point where things are so seriously. It's a big team effort, it's a big interdisciplinary effort, and yeah, it takes a village of lots of different people with lots of different skills to save a species. So this is the European wildcat. It's a small cat species. It's small but very feisty, and it's the wildcats we have in Britain are a subpopulation of the European wildcat. So they're not a separate subspecies, they're a subpopulation. Wildcats need a mixture of forest and grassland habitat in order to survive, and that provides them with cover for denning sites and resting sites, and it also provides them with their prey, which is mainly small mammals, mice, voles, and rabbits. The decline of wildcats in Scotland has happened over a number of centuries, and historically the threat, historically they were distributed across the whole of Britain, and the threats really come from hunting, particularly for sport and fur, persecution as vermin, and habitat loss, particularly the deforestation. And they became extinct from England and Wales by about the late 1800s. And from the 1800s onwards, there was also a real escalation of predator control because of the rise of sporting estates. And by 1850s, wildcat had become locally extinct in northern Scotland, and nearly extinct by the 19th century. With 1915 being viewed as the population low point. And an expansion did happen after World War I, really because of reduction in persecution, because of a reduction in people in rural areas. And by the mid-20th century, we believe there was the sort of recent peak of wildcat populations, and populations then began to decline again in the 60s and 70s as threats re-established, and particularly perhaps the ability to persecute wildcats and the technology improving. And legal protection for wildcats didn't come in until 1988. Wildcats can hybridize or interbreed with domestic cats. Domestic cats are related species that are separated by about 1 million years of evolutionary history, and the offspring are viable and fertile, and hybrids can backcross into either parent. And there's a variety of methods that have been used in order to distinguish wildcats from tabby domestic cats, and particularly the main field tool that is used within Britain is the pelage scoring method that was developed by the National Museums of Scotland, and looks at different traits on the pelage or coat patterning to distinguish between wildcats and the tabby domestic cat form. And genetic research has also given us a really good window into what is happening in terms of hybridization. So the genetic research that's been published and conducted so far shows that hybridization has escalated from around the 1960s onwards. It's actually, although wild and domestic cats have been in theory in contact since Roman times when domestic cats were introduced to mainland Britain, in fact the hybridization, the main levels of hybridization, if you like, that have happened have happened quite recently. And that nowadays most wild living cats show a signature of hybrid ancestry, which is why I said at the start of this talk that it population estimates are complicated. And so what this means is we view hybridization not so much as a primary cause of population decline, but as a symptom of small population size. So as populations of wildcats have declined because of other reasons, persecution and habitat loss particularly, then it's been more likely for wildcat populations to hybridize, and probably the impact of those individual hybridization events has been a lot more serious. So during the 1980s and 1990s, people started to become interested in understanding more about wildcats and started to become concerned about hybridization and about the fact populations were declining. So really, during these decades, there was a lot of research on basic research on wildcat habitat, behavior and use, and diet, genetics and pelage. And that informed the first targeted conservation project, which started in 2010, called the Highland Tiger Project, which was focused in the Cairngorms National Park and was really focused in many ways on trying to get more information for what was viewed as the wildcat's main stronghold, and also on changing attitudes around domestic cat ownership and particularly land management methods. Out of that project, the Scottish Wildcat Action Project was born, and the National Wildcat Recovery Strategy. And Scottish Wildcat Action started in 2015 and was focused on looking at trying to recover wildcats across a range of different sites in Scotland, which were called priority areas. And there it had a very ambitious aim of trying to halt the decline within 5 years. And in parallel, there was already a recognition at that point that things were quite serious for wildcats, and that it would be a good idea to understand really the extent to which the captive population, which at that point was much smaller than it is today, could be used as a potential recovery tool. But so the reports from that project are available online on the Nature Scot website. But partway through that project, the project partnership became concerned that things were a lot more serious in the wild than had first been thought, that the wildcat populations were actually considerably smaller than originally indicated when the project was developed. It was really clear that although there were wild living cats out there, the majority of them were hybrids, and they were extremely outnumbered by domestic feral cats and their hybrids. And so an independent review was commissioned by the International Union for the Conservation of Nature Cat Specialist Group to come and have a look really at the status of the population. And they concluded that the population was no longer viable, meaning that even though there might still be individual wildcats out in the wild, they were too few and they were too fragmented and far apart and hybridized to form a self-sustaining population. And that really was the motivation, and the recommendations from that report, which is also freely available, formed the basis for the current Saving Wildcats project. And it's important to start with an optimistic view of the world, and our vision ultimately for wildcats in Scotland should be, and indeed I hope for the rest of Britain, mainland Britain, is to restore wildcats across landscapes, and that we get to a point where wildcats and humans are living together a lot more harmoniously than they have done in the past. In the past, they've been primarily viewed as vermin and persecuted. And so Saving Wildcats is a European partnership project dedicated to starting us on the first step of that path, and really preventing the total extinction of wildcats in Scotland by breeding and releasing them into the wild. And we hope very much that it will be the start of an upwards trajectory for this species again, and perhaps the first step in a wider journey to recovering them across Britain. And our project runs for between 20 and 2026. Like most things, we're taking a little bit longer than expected because of the small issue of the pandemic, but at the moment that's the timeline. And it's a project in two halves. The first half of the project really involves everything to do with preparing both our knowledge of the release site and mitigating threats at the release site, and preparing the conservation breeding population of wildcats so that it's in a state where it can be released. We've got enough cats and they've been managed in the right conditions. And then those two things come together for the first trial release, which actually is happening right now. So it's a very exciting point at which to be talking to you. So it started in June 23 last year, just a couple of months ago, and it will be running until for the next couple of weeks, and then we will have conducted the first trial release season, and then there's 2 further sets of releases planned, and monitoring and evaluation will be happening for each of those. And our approach is informed, apologies, the slide looks a bit blurry, but our approach is really informed by lots of other similar conservation projects globally. A lot of the best practice in terms of that is kind of embodied in the IUCN guidelines, which are a great set of tools that are available online. And we're also really lucky in Scotland to have the Scottish Code for Conservation Translocations, and that is a really great tool in terms of helping to think about the design of a good conservation translocation project or reintroduction project, because it's really important to understand that the vast majority of conservation translocations are not immediately successful. There's a high failure rate, and so it's important that the design of the project is looked at really carefully, and also that there's lots of evaluation that happens at every step in order to ensure that those that the conservation resources are being targeted for the best use. Conservation reintroductions or conservation translocations are really interdisciplinary projects. They require a lot of different types of expertise. And as a result, we have quite a big team of people that are helping us with this. Just to acknowledge, these are all my staff based at RZSS who are working on this. And it's a range of different people who are, some of them whom are wildcat conservation breeding experts, and others who are ecologists and communications experts. And there's a whole range of different skills that go into this, and we have a much wider group of external advisors as well. But these are the people that are really helping to make this project a success on the ground. And at the moment, the last few weeks, they've been working very, very hard at that. Well, we have our project management group, which consists of representatives from the partner organisations, and then a wide set of other advisors. So I'll just focus a little bit more detail on some of the different aspects of the current project. So the first aspect of phase 1 is the conservation breeding, and in order to ensure we had the cats that we needed for the release, we constructed a conservation breeding for release centre. This is a large facility that is built at the Royal Zoological Society of Scotland's Highland Wildlife Park, which is in the Cairngorms National Park, located near Aviemore. It's off-show to any visitors to the park. So although the park itself is an active zoo that people can visit, the conservation breeding for release facility is located in a quiet area at the back of the park, and it's not possible for people to go and visit it. We took 8 breeding pairs from the UK's conservation breeding programme, which were carefully selected in order to be the initial founder parents for this population. And these pairs are bred in breeding enclosures, and these enclosures here on this picture are an example of the breeding enclosures. And the kittens are then removed to what we call much larger open-topped pre-release enclosures at around 6 months of age prior to being released. And this is just a drone shot of the CBRC, or the Conservation Breeding for Release Centre. And just to show again, these are the bottom left. We've got pairs of breeding enclosures where we can manage the animals more closely, and then at the top of the picture and on the right hand side, we've got the larger pre-release enclosures where the cats that are due to be released into the wild spend a period of time before they're released. The model that we're using is very much informed by the amazing work that's being conducted at the Iberian Lynx breeding centres in Portugal and Spain. And we're very grateful to our partners, Junta de Andalucía, for a lot of input and expertise on that. And obviously it's a different species, but a lot of the challenges and questions in terms of breeding and releasing a cat species into the wild are very much paralleled. So we've taken a lot of input from that project, which has been running successfully for a number of decades. The point of having cats in breeding enclosures is so that they can breed, and this is an example of the kind of outcome of that. So obviously I couldn't do a talk without showing some cute pictures of kittens. And so those are some of our inhabitants of the conservation breeding centre. Once cats move into the pre-release enclosures, they are managed in a much more of a hands-off way, and we make the use of CCTV camera technology in order to assist with that. So just a shot here of our control room, which is based about half a kilometre away from the actual breeding enclosures, but we've got over 50 different CCTV cameras which we can look into our breeding and release enclosures. And some of the examples of the climbing structure and habitat that we see inside those enclosures. And we're looking at a variety of different metrics in terms of how we're recording the cat's behaviour in those enclosures. One of the things that's, I guess, important to note about this is that it's difficult to know exactly what's going to make for a successful wildcat back in the wild. You know, there's lots of personality traits that a cat could have in terms of, you know, its profile of boldness versus shyness and other things like that. So at the moment, a lot of what we're doing is measuring quite in some detail how individual cat behavior varies, and it certainly does vary, but we don't yet know what's likely to impact on survival or long-term success. And in fact, it's probably most likely that having a mixture of cat personalities in the wild is going to be most helpful. But this is the sort of thing that our team can do. So they're using a CCTV camera to follow what the cats are doing. A cat is doing in terms of the breeding enclosures, and able to do focused behavioural watches throughout the day. It's a very, very powerful technology to help us understand that. The other side of the preparation is understanding everything that's happening in the wild, which is extremely important. And really, there's kind of three tasks that the field team have. One is assessing the release site, both ecologically and from a social perspective, preparing it in terms of identifying threats and mitigating them, and then monitoring the release in terms of once the cats are released, monitoring them, particularly in terms of looking at a variety of different survey methods and GPS tracking of the cats. And there's a whole variety of different actions that the field team have been conducting, and a lot of the work of the field team went into the sort of informing our translocation license and ensuring we received sign-off from Scottish Government in order to do this project. And I'll just touch on a few of the details here. So in terms of the release site, we're very grateful to have the partnership of the Cairngorms Connect project in order to conduct the releases. It's a partnership project that covers 600 kilometres squares, and the landowners in this partnership are working together, and they're committed to a bold 200-year vision to enhance habitats and species and ecological processes. And obviously, it's really important, if we're going to be doing a reintroduction of this nature, that there's a long-term commitment to not only the species, but also the habitat supporting those species. So it's a really great area to choose for a significant project like this. In terms of what the field team are doing, a lot of ecological surveys and monitoring, so camera trap surveys, dedicated prey surveys, and all of that formed a baseline year one report, which we've then repeated annually for the last 3 years, and will be ongoing throughout the project. In terms of the camera trap work, we've got a large grid of over 100 camera traps spread across the release site, and that allows us to record the abundance and distribution of all detected species across the release site. So not just getting a handle on cats and prey species, but also getting a handle on every kind of detectable animal that is out there. And these are the sorts of outputs that we can generate to identify hotspots of specific activity or also human disturbance. In terms of the prey base, it's probably one of the most critical things in terms of the wildcat distribution within the release site. The area has been used long term as a monitoring site for small mammals, and we're partnering with the Cairngorms Connect Predator Project, who've been monitoring data at the release site since 2017, looking at abundance and field signs for a whole variety of different prey species, including bank voles, wood mice, field voles, and then also conducting rabbit surveys and water vole surveys. One of the really important things to understand in terms of ongoing threat mitigation is the presence of feral cats, hybrids or domestic cats within the release site. And the camera trap grid helps us to get a really good handle on the cat presence. The site itself was chosen because it has a low level of very low feral cat population, and maintaining a very high vigilance allows us to identify any particular threats that there might be in the area. Most of the cats that have been detected have been identified as owned pet cats. Every cat in the area is recorded in a catalogue and monitored, and it's established what its neutered status is, and if necessary, if it's a feral cat, it's either neutered, and I'll go on to explain a little bit more about that in a moment. And if it's a pet cat, then the owner is approached for a conversation. We use Trap, Neuter, Vaccinate, Release as our tool within the release site. This is the National Strategy for Feral Cat Control for Wildcat Conservation. And we do that under license from Nature Scott. And the aim is to reduce hybridization and disease transfer. Feral cats that are identified are tracked, so that's after a lot of effort that the field team go into to ensure that they're not in fact a pet cat, which might involve going door to door to talk to people in the local area with photographs of the cat to ensure that it's not someone's pet. But feral cats are trapped and health checked, neutered and vaccinated by a vet, and then returned to the site. And this is just one of our team releasing one of the cats. We're very grateful to be working closely with Cats Protection in the local area, who have had a very long-term programme of looking at feral cat trap, neuter, vaccinate, release within the local area. We're really lucky that there's very high awareness within the area of the Cairngorms that we're working in, because of a number of past wildcat conservation projects that I touched on earlier. So there's a very high understanding within the local population that responsible cat ownership is important, and we're very grateful to have Cats Protection who've done all this fantastic work over many years in the local area. We've got a responsible cat ownership campaign, which is around making your cat a super cat, and we've also engaged with every single potential pet owner across the release site using a letter drop, which we conducted in 2021 and 2022, where people were able to answer questionnaires about responsible cat ownership and their attitudes towards wildcat restoration. And overall, responses were very positive in terms of people's attitudes to re-establishing wildcats. We've also been doing a lot of work with the community. It's really important that if wildcats are re-established in the local area, which we hope they will be, that people feel really closely connected to them, and that they also feel the benefit of wildcats returning. And so we've done a lot of work with local community groups, everything from the national park rangers to local school children, going to game shows and agricultural fairs to talk to people about wildcats and understand more about their attitudes, and also answer their questions. We've got a lot of local businesses and cultural links to wildcats in the area, and we're really keen to work with local business to promote or find an angle for them to promote why wildcats returning is important to them. So Newtonmore, one of the villages in the release site, actually has a wildcat on its village sign. It's also the seat of Clan Macpherson, which has the wildcat on its crest. The local secondary school has a wildcat on its crest. We have a trail that children can go around looking for statues of wildcats. And there's a variety of different other brands that are associated with wildcats locally. So we've been trying to work closely with different people who are interested to kind of share knowledge on the project and also help promote the things that they do. One of the acknowledged big ongoing threats is predator control. So it's legal to conduct predator control of feral cats and also a range of other predators. And this is definitely a threat in terms of the future for wildcats. We've had drop-in sessions with more than 50 local landowners in and around the release site to try and talk to them and identify their concerns around identification and the potential predation of ground nesting birds and conflict with predator control activities. And at the moment, landowners who are in and around the release site are able to opt in to receiving updates from the field team about whether or not there's cats on their land and where they are. And that's we're obviously just at the start of this. We're just at the start of the release, so there's lots of things that could happen in the future, but we are starting I think with a real feeling of positivity from a lot of people about just the general approach to being open and transparent in terms of communication and by the team. The project aims are to do now the trial release, so we're moving into the second phase. So as I said, this just started in June, and we're releasing the first 20 cats, and we're in the middle of that at the moment, and we'll be monitoring and evaluating everything that happens with that release, and that will then inform future releases. In terms of the release strategy, we've opted to do what's called soft release, or sometimes it's called a delayed release. What that means essentially is constructing small enclosures within the release site, or smaller enclosures within the release site, moving cats to them and then releasing them once the cats have settled. That's the strategy we've adopted, certainly for the first year of this project. We started the release in June and they're carrying on until September, and that's because of it being a period for peak prey availability, and because of daylight hours, which vary considerably where we are because of how far north we are between summer and winter. It's also one of the lower times of lowest risk for road mortality. Of course, we'll be in the opposite situation in winter when it gets dark here before 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and it's dark for many hours. All of the cats will be collared with GPS collars, or are collared with GPS collars, and that's allowing us to follow really in an amazing amount of detail what individual cats' behaviours are. And the cats are released in several small cohorts of between about 2 to 4 individuals. Our post-release monitoring isn't just about collaring. We're also maintaining our camera trapping, sighting cameras in targeted areas as well if necessary, and we'll be doing analysis of the scats using dietary metabarcoding methods, genetic method for understanding what's in the diet, and gathering a whole range of other information as well, including ad hoc sightings from across our network of local contacts. The GPS collars have been used widely to monitor wildcats across Europe, and indeed to track hybrid wildcats in Scotland. So we're really grateful to have lots of previous experience to support us in that respect to draw on, and the data is stored on collars and for then manual download in the field. So the field team get within range of the wildcats and then download the backlog of tracking data. We anticipate that we'll be tracking the cats for up to 9 months. So we've just started the release of the first 20 wildcats, and we are then aiming to release a further 20 or so in 2024 and another further 20 or so in 2025. And really, the first part of this project is now over, but we're only just starting, because now the big question is, will wildcats re-establish at the release site? And what we're aiming to do is monitor as much as we can about the release population, so we can learn all of the factors that contribute to success or failure, and then adapt our methods and move forwards over time, which is really what all one can do for a release project. So watch this space for more updates. Hopefully maybe I'll be able to come back and update you at some other point. And just I guess because it's really all about the cats, just to show you a video of one of the first cats that was released from the soft release enclosures in June, coming out under its own speed from one of the enclosures. So these enclosures are opened after a few days, just by 2 people attending the site, and then the cats are allowed to come out at their own time and onwards, start their journey onwards into the wild. So just a quick thank you to all of our supporters. Projects like this require a huge amount of support and input, and we're really grateful to have a wide range of people and organisations that have our back and are also wanting really to support the recovery of this fantastic species in the wild. So we're really grateful to them and all the wildcat captive holders across the UK, of which there's more than 30 that are holding part of the insurance population for wildcats, and have really, I suppose, in that sense, made this project possible in the first place, and a wide range of other technical supporters that are giving us expert advice and input, and sharing their time for the benefit of the species. So really, really grateful to them, and lots of volunteers who've helped out. Just quickly, so if you're interested in helping, we'd be really grateful. We release a newsletter every 2 months, and you can sign up to receive that into your inbox. If you're a co-op member, you can support the project by signing up to us as your charity. We've got a scheme where you can sponsor one of the cats in the breeding centre, and we are periodically looking for volunteers to help with different opportunities, different aspects of the project, and we send those all out via email on the same emailing list. So if you sign up to that, you also get those opportunities into your inbox. So thanks so much for listening. I'm looking forward to taking some of your questions now.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Helen. That was absolutely fantastic, fascinating as always. And as usual, even though we've spoken before and speak on calls like this, I've got loads of questions, but I'm going to try and hold my tongue and let everyone else's questions come first.
Yeah, and sorry for the technical issues at the start there. We definitely checked that, so I don't know why it happened.
Always happens. So we'll run through as many of these as possible. I'm trying to combine questions where I can see that we can cover
sure.
two at once. So there's a couple of questions about the capture and release of feral cats, particularly around disease monitoring. So Sonia's asking, do the cats trapped in the TNVR program, do they get tested for feline immunodeficiency virus or feline leukemia virus? And are those viruses ones that can be transmitted to the wildcat population? Are they prevalent in the wildcat population? What's the kind of issue with that? And I think crossing over with another question, if you do find sort of problematic viruses or health issues with captured feral cats, do they still get released? What's the approach
yeah?
there?
So we yes, I think yes and yes to the first two questions. So we've got a really extensive disease screening and surveillance program that's led by our veterinary team as part of the project. So there's a whole range of different things in terms of disease that we're considering. So one is we've got very detailed biosecurity and disease screening processes for taking cats into the CBRC, into the conservation breeding for release centre, and they're screened for diseases at various stages, and we're also vaccinating all of our animals, and we are also running disease surveillance across the release site. So that part of that informed our disease risk assessment, which was part of our kind of the evidence base that we had to pull together as part of the release. But we're receiving samples from local vets and also from feral cats that we trap, and we test those as well. So we're trying to really build up a profile for disease risk. And yes, trap, neuter, vaccinate, release. The vaccination is really important part of this, and so there's obviously any of the cats that are trapped for neutering are also vaccinated.
Perfect, thanks. And obviously, you've laid out just how much work over how long a period of time it takes to get to this point. The project's been hitting headlines recently, but it's been a huge amount of work that's led up to this point. And that crossed you over the COVID years, as you mentioned. So Sophie's just asking, what were the challenges during the COVID years for this project? And in fact, were there any benefits at all?
Oh, that's a really good question. In terms of the benefits, yeah, I mean, there were definitely challenges. So I think everyone will probably be familiar with some of them, so we were just starting on the cusp of lockdown. So there were lots of challenges in terms of, just recruitment and construction and things like that. I think some of the sort of more interesting challenges, I suppose, one is it's really important in projects like this to conduct face-to-face engagement with stakeholders and listen to concerns. And obviously that was for the first start of the project, that was quite impossible. We tried to get around that creatively by holding, sort of webinars and online drop-in sessions and things like that, but definitely has become a lot easier since it's been possible to really go and meet people face to face. I guess in terms of positives, to some extent we were delayed by a year, but perhaps in some ways it also bought us an extra year of time in preparation, because there were certainly some preparatory activities that we could run with, even though it was, there were certain bits of it that weren't possible. So I think that is probably a possibility. And I think the other thing is that establishing a project like this was always going to be really challenging, but we had a partnership that we're really committed to make it happen, whatever, and didn't want to let the pandemic be the reason for wildcat recovery not happening. So very grateful to have that commitment. I think it probably spurred everyone on.
Great, thank you. A question from Lisa. What would be the ideal number of wildcats to achieve in this environment for the population to be sustainable?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's $1 million question. I think that probably you're aware that there's some there's modelling that one can do to try and get at this. It's called population viability modelling or viability assessments. And the modelling that we have, says that you probably need a population of around 40 individuals to have a 95% probability survival over 50 years. So in terms of, the size of habitat we've chosen to release cats into and the number of cats we've chosen to release is kind of geared around there being a reasonable chance of achieving that 5 years, but by 5 years after the end of the project. But all models are wrong. It's just a question of how wrong they are, and at the end of the day, we're not really going to know until we do it and we find out. So we'll be monitoring everything to do with the release really closely. And, we've got estimates around, the carrying capacity for the habitat and things like that. But we will learn from the cats where they really like to go and what they really like to do. And so I think we'll be revising those estimates over time.
Amazing. Thank you. I'm sorry, I'm firing these at you quick fire.
No, that's fine. Keep going.
We've got so many questions, and I'm keen to hear the answers. There's a couple of questions actually about the what you talked about with the hybridization, the pelage, looking at the pelage to see the differences. An interesting one here. Are most hybrid offspring with tabby, or can they have other domestic cat coat color variations depending on the domestic parent? So is it just tabby cats that are interbreeding, or is it other cats, and is it still the same changes in coat that you see?
No, I mean they can definitely, wildcats can definitely hybridize with any type of domestic cat. I guess if a hybrid has a obviously domestic coat pattern, then it's easy to identify it as a hybrid. I guess we're often concerned about the fact that it's harder to do that with a tabby form, which is the wild type form of the domestic cat. So that's really where a lot of the identification guidelines are geared around, because those are the cases that are hard to discriminate. I think what's really important to point out is that very little is understood about the inheritance patterns of pelage traits. And there's kind of good reasons for that. There's not really been any controlled experiments of this, and nor would I support them, nor would I support that happening. So, however, what we are going to be able to do at the CBRC, at the breeding centre, is for the first time really track in a lot of detail how pelage traits between our wildcats are passed on, and the wildcats in the breeding programme they're all high scoring genetically scoring wildcats, but they do have some degree of domestic cat ancestry. Every wildcat in Britain has some degree of domestic cat ancestry, so we will be able to really understand how pelage traits are inherited between parent and offspring, and actually the variation in siblings as well.
Hey, that's really interesting. Okay, so a couple of questions also about the process now, monitoring them when they're out in their environment. Mark asks, how long will the tracking collars stay on, and are they designed to come off naturally after a period of time? And if I can tag a question onto that, I was wondering if and when successful breeding out in the field happens and there are wildcat kittens that have been born in the wild, would the Saving Wildcats project be doing any sort of interventions to monitor or tag those kittens, or will they rely purely on the camera arrays?
So the collars, the battery life on the collars is estimated to last for about 9 months, and the collars will be the cats will be retrapped for collar removal, and that's within the project partnership previous experience of doing that on wildcats. So that's the plan. In terms of the offspring of the cats, I think we are not completely sure yet exactly how our sort of generation 2 monitoring will happen. We're certainly going to be doing that because it's extremely important. I think first of all, we want to see, we want to get to that breeding success. But in the short term, as I mentioned, we've got very high levels of surveillance in and around the release site. So all of the we've got a high expectation that we'll be detecting kittens if they're born, and that's going to be, I guess, the first opportunity of that happening really is probably sometime into next year. But we'll be monitoring that very carefully if and when that happens.
Okay. And this is a few questions in one, some of which we've touched on, but there are definitely some in here that we haven't. So Daniel asks, how pure are the captive animals in terms of their sort of genetics? And are continental wildcats at all used in the breeding program, or have they been introduced in the past? And then linked to both of those, how would you prevent unintentional domestication traits emerging as a result of animals living in a domestic environment or a captive environment before release?
Yeah, so I think really good question. So as I mentioned earlier, there is a level of hybridization in the captive population. We measure that, we can measure and understand that genetically, and we use a kind of a genetic cutoff in terms of management. So that is equivalent to a wildcat having, kind of in the worst case scenario, 75% wildcat ancestry, which would be but actually most of the captive bred cats have a much higher level of ancestry than 75%. We've done a lot of things to kind of manage the stud book, the breeding program, for wildcats quite carefully, because obviously another aspect of having a breeding population, even 150 individuals, that's actually quite a small number, is that over time the relatedness increases or inbreeding increases. So to answer then the second question, whilst we're managing that very carefully in terms of our pairings of our breeding, we are considering bringing in wildcats from the European population to kind of boost the gene pool and increase genetic diversity. So that's very much part of this project. It's not happened yet, but there is a plan for that to happen within the time frame of the project. And so so I'm hoping that that's something that will happen in the next couple of years. And I've forgotten the third bit of the question.
The third question was about domestication traits that might emerge in captive breeding programs.
Yeah, so everything in terms of the management of the cats in captivity is trying to minimize the level of I suppose acclimatization or contact with humans. So sorts of things that happen is I've shown the design of the enclosures, but also looking at how we dissociate human presence from the delivery of food. So delivering food at random times and through different methods like that, and also minimizing vehicle noise at the enclosures we use. We only approach the vicinity of the enclosures using an electric buggy and then go on foot. We're measuring keeper response rate as well with the CCTV facility. So it allows us for somebody to sit down at the facility and watch to see how the cat is responding to a keeper arriving and providing it with food. So these are just some of the examples.
Thank you so much. Okay, we aren't obviously going to be able to cover all questions. I'm going to try and roll a couple up into one again to finish us off. And it's about sort of the breeding out in the field again. So first of all, when they've left the captive breeding program and they've been released into the field, it's still obviously a small population initially. How can you limit inbreeding within the wild population? And linked to that, if wildcats have the choice, do they tend to choose to mate with wildcats over feral cats, or if both were present, could it still happen just as much?
So I think it's a really good question around limiting inbreeding within the population. So it's a issue that faces all small populations, and of course is important in terms of a reintroduction. So we've tried to think about that as much as we can in terms of where we place different related individuals across the release site, and obviously in terms of the initial selection of those individuals. But there's a limit to what can be achieved, and especially if a population is very small. that is clearly a task that over time needs to be monitored and managed. So if we were to find that there were too many related animals within that population, we would want to manage that by adding other animals that were unrelated. And that's definitely part of the rationale for bringing in further animals from Europe. Sorry, the second bit.
It was around whether they would choose to breed with feral cats or wildcats if they had the choice between them, in the same environment.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, for our cats, we don't know. And we'll find that out. But certainly the data that is available from European wildcat populations suggests that wildcats will choose to mate with other wildcats in preference to mating with domestic cats, and that that's very much borne out by the sort of studies that have happened in Europe, and also is borne out by the genetic signature that hybridization is recent, so that when wildcat populations were larger, there wasn't a lot of hybridization with wild and domestic cats, even though there would certainly lots of domestic cats around. But in this specific case now of re-establishing a population in the Cairngorms National Park, we don't know. What we do know is that we want to minimize the risk of contact with domestic cats as much as possible, and that's why we are doing this. Keeping really the effort on trap, neuter, vaccinate, release, and responsible pet ownership up.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Senn. That is unfortunately all we've got time for. There are many more questions we didn't get to, quite a few to do with the links with pest management and the crossovers with wildcat and feral cats. So I'm sorry we didn't get through to all the issues, but we did prioritize the most upvoted questions. So hopefully everyone found that as interesting as I did. So I just want to finish just to say a huge thank you, first of all, to Dr. Helen Senn for that really fascinating talk. I hope this won't be the last talk we host from Dr. Senn, because obviously this is an evolving project and one with some really exciting moments to come. I'd just like to finish by just a quick appeal. There's ways that you can support the Saving Wildcats project as Helen laid out. Please do consider doing so. You can sponsor a wildcat or donate to that project. It really is a fantastic project to be supporting. There's also ways that you can get involved in other forms of mammal monitoring with the Mammal Society. You can download our free app, Mammal Mapper, and do wildlife surveys that are closer to home if you're not based up in the Cairngorms, and with mammals that you're likely to spot in your local ecosystem. We really need that data to inform conservation. So please do get involved either with our surveys or just as you're out and about, whatever you see and whatever signs of mammals you see, record them on Mammal Mapper. And finally, we do offer these webinars for free, but we are a charity. So if you've got some value out of this and our other webinars in this series, please do consider dropping us a small donation, or if you're really interested in this area, sign up as a Mammal Society member and join us on this journey. As a member, you receive our Mammal News magazine, you receive discounts on our paid for trainings and events, and you also have the opportunity to steer our work. And at the moment, you also get a lovely sustainable wood pin badge with a illustration by wildlife artist Lucia Hayden. So it's a really good time to sign up as a member or to give one as a gift. So without further ado, I'll say thank you very much again to Dr. Helen Senn. A huge thank you to you all for joining us and for all those fantastic questions. And we look forward to seeing you at the next webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Matt.